Ladies and gentlemen, friends of the Riga Conference, friends of the network of Galaxy, as we framed the Riga Conference this year. This is the 18th edition of the Riga Conference. You cannot find too many countries which could sustain security conference for so many years. It started in 2006 with NATO summit in Riga. And the Riga Conference always addressed security issues from different perspectives, and this year as well. International security landscape these days is filled with crises, conflicts, and wars. And international security landscape is not secure at all. It means we will have a lot what to discuss. And international society is requesting in those very complicated times very timely and decisive decisions. But as we all know, decisions need effects, analysis, ideas, discussions, exchange of views. And this is particularly important when lives of individuals are at stake. The Riga Conference is exactly the platform where such ideas, which are needed for policymakers, which are needed for think tank community, academics, and also wider society, are developed, are offered, and are provided for better decisions to be taken with regard to security issues. And those decisions will be taken in Riga, in Brussels, in Washington, and many other capitals of transatlantic community. On behalf of all organizers of the conference, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Latvian Transatlantic Organization, I welcome you all to Riga and to the Riga Conference. And now it's my great honor and pleasure to give floor to President of the Republic of Latvia, Edgars Rinkēvičs, for the opening speech. Please, President, floor is yours.
Well, dear friends, Professor Ozoliņa, Foreign Minister, Excellencies, it's frankly a bit strange to change the role because I used to close this conference normally on Saturday afternoon. Now, with the new job comes also the new responsibility, and I'm supposed to formally open Riga Conference with an opening speech. But first of all, let me thank LATO, Foreign Ministry, Defense Ministry, volunteers, all those who have supported and contributed and who are going also to support and contribute to this conference. As Žaneta Ozoliņa just said, the first time we met was in 2006. It was a conference that was part of NATO summit. The agenda of NATO summit and the conference was what we are going to do about Afghanistan, what we are going to do about NATO's responsibilities. There was a very famous saying, if NATO doesn't go out of area, then it goes out of responsibility. Now, 17 years later, NATO has pretty much of the old responsibilities and a lot of job to do and also a lot of new challenges to tackle. I think that if we talk about the current situation, I would probably be very blunt and I would say that the world is a mess, Europe is a mess, the Middle East is a mess, everything is a mess. And it is very difficult to find a way out of this challenging situation. We also believe, we also understand that the coming year is going to be very challenging. It's going to be very challenging for Israel, it's going to be very challenging for Ukraine, it's going to be very challenging for Europe as a whole, and of course we have a lot of things to watch when it comes also to electoral processes. At the same time, I do believe that so far we have surprised ourselves, because we have been able to keep our unity, we have been able to keep our support for Ukraine, we have been able to work out solutions as NATO, as the European Union, for many different and many difficult challenges. To that end, frankly, it would be very difficult to compete with President of the United States, Joe Biden, and his very powerful speech last night to not only the American nation, but I believe also to the whole world. And I very much welcome the commitment that the United States have made both to Ukraine, to Israel, but also to the transatlantic alliance, also to the Baltic states that have been very specifically mentioned. And I think that this shows that even in a very dark period of time, there is always a glimmer of hope, and we very much trust our American and Canadian allies, we very much trust our British allies, we very much trust our European allies and partners. I think that as we speak today, it is very important to outline that we stand in solidarity with Israel in its fight against terrorism, in its fight against Hamas terrorist organizations, and also we underline that we all understand that Hamas is not Palestinians, that Hamas does not represent Palestinians. We definitely want to see that Palestinian Authority, Palestine as such, condemns terrorism, works out the solutions how to stop the brutal spread of this disease. But we also underline that it is important that international humanitarian law, even under those very challenging times, is being observed by all. I also believe that we do need to understand that we must tackle two challenges at a time. And we all understand that Ukraine must win the Russian Federation. We also understand that Israel must win international and Hamas-type terrorism. We also see that there is a clear link between Russia and Iran. We see that Iran is sending drones, sending a lot of equipment to Russia, helping to fight against Ukraine. We see also the social media, the jubilation that we have seen by many Russian propagandists over the terrorist attacks against Israel. To some extent, I would say that this is now very important that we unite our efforts tackling this very, very challenging situation. There is also some good news. I do believe that what we are seeing, NATO is getting stronger, the European Union is getting stronger. We all are raising our defense expenditures. This country is committed to reach the defense expenditures to the level of 3% of GDP in coming years. We also see that we need to address issues that are related to defense capabilities, to defense industrial capabilities. There are going to be very interesting discussions. I very much welcome that former Prime Minister and current Foreign Minister, who is much better Foreign Minister than the previous one, and also the Commissioner Breton is here, and they are going to shed some thoughts on this very important topic. I think that what we are seeing at this point, the deployment of brigade-size allied forces in the Baltic states, the increased attention to the resilience in the domain of cyber space against disinformation, that understanding that we need to tackle the new challenges like the artificial intelligence, especially the use of artificial intelligence, again trying to meddle into political processes, the need to develop legal framework in this respect. Also the fact that Latvia as the presidency of the Council of Europe is also attaching particular importance to the working group that is currently tasked to work out the kind of framework convention in this regard, the Council of Europe Framework Convention. Those are very, very important things that one needs to outline. But at the same time, we still need to understand what we need to do next. First, full and continuous support for Ukraine. be it military support, political support, and to that end, I do believe that by the end of this year, also the European Union needs to send a clear signal to both Ukraine and Moldova by starting accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova when it comes to their EU candidate status. We also need to acknowledge and we also need to work out a very clear strategic path for Ukraine to become NATO member state. Because we all understand we can talk about assurances and guarantees, but the only strong guarantee as we see is the full-fledged membership into NATO. When and how, this is of course is something where this conference, many experts, politicians are going to talk a lot. But I think that we need also to acknowledge that if we want to have long-lasting peace in Europe, then we also need to address the membership of Ukraine into EU and NATO and membership of Moldova into EU. Also, we need to tackle some of hybrid warfare challenges. We are still waiting for the results of the investigation of what has happened in the Baltic Sea, the so-called Baltic Connector. We need to understand that we need to protect critical infrastructure. If we see that there is a state party responsible for the damaging of the critical infrastructure, then we also need to address this at NATO level, maybe actually also considering closing the shipping in the Baltic Sea for the Russian ships if Russia is found guilty. But I just want to underline that we have to also get full results of the investigation. We here in Latvia, like our neighbors in Lithuania, like our good friends and partners in Poland, are seeing that migration is being used as the hybrid weapon. We also believe that we need to address not only the physical security of border with Belarus, with Russia, but we also need to address political and legal protection of the border. So I do believe that there are many challenges. But as probably at one point nobody could expect those brutal attacks in Israel, we also need to be forthcoming and to understand that there are also some regions in Europe that if they are not addressed, then they can present some challenge also for the European Union and NATO in the future. And here I'm talking about the Western Balkans. I do believe that Western Balkans is something where we could say that the European Union still fails its commitment. We still need to have much bolder strategy there. So plenty of issues to discuss. I'm very happy to see many old friends here in this room. I wish you a really successful conference. I very much hope that in a year to come, some of those very challenging circumstances will somehow be addressed. And to all of us, I can only wish to be bold, be prepared, and stay strong. Thank you.
Greetings. I'm David Andelman. I'm a columnist for CNN Opinion and creator of Substack's Andelman Unleashed, and it's a great privilege to help set the tone for this year's most remarkable Riga Global Conference. Of course, I'm not alone. I have some extraordinary help in the form of our host nation's foreign minister and past prime minister, Krišjānis Kariņš. And the European Union's Commissioner for Internal Markets, Thierry Breton. In terms of a tone, I've been especially compelled for years as I've traveled the world, but ever more pressingly in recent days, by the issue of a fundamental morality of relations between countries. What measures might have effectively protected democratic order, and when and under what circumstances could such an order ever envisioned being suspended or breached. Russia, of course, has largely suspended any moral order in its pursuit of war in Ukraine, while Ukraine itself might be putting itself in just a similar position by demanding and pursuing full reclamation of Crimea. Equally now, in the Middle East, there's a similar question, which seems to be raised in recent days by President Biden, Chancellor Scholz, Prime Minister Sunak, on their visits to the region, urging restraint by Israel in its reprisals for the atrocities of some Hamas terrorists. Closer to home, the EU, particularly Commissioner Breton, seem to have suggested in recent weeks that Elon Musk's X, Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, and TikTok's Shou Ziqiu have suspended such morality, and the EU is preparing to enforce their return to just these standards. With that prelude, Minister Karins and Commissioner Breton will each speak for a few minutes, and then we can all chat. Mr. Foreign Minister.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Your Excellency, there's so many excellent people here. I guess you can never go wrong starting out that way. But I was listening to what our President was saying and the introductory remarks here. The way I would frame it is that the current world order and democracy as such is under pressure, to not say under attack. And really, I think what is at stake, and it's actually quite serious, is will the world order of rules-based world order prevail, or will we end up with, power-based, the rule of thuggery? Whoever has the biggest muscles or the biggest weapons, they just do what they want. And when we look around the world, the difficulty is that we have lots of conflicts and ever more conflicts ongoing. So we have Russia's war in Ukraine, more than 600 days, very brutal and very black and white. One country breaching a sovereign neighbor's border with the intent to take over territory. Good old-fashioned imperialism. But it's happening almost right on our doorstep where we're speaking. Then we have the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, which had a flare-up. We have in the Sahel, Mali, moving east, Niger, some others around there. Of course, we have the long-standing Hamas-Israel, which is now an outright war. Hamas against the state of Israel, with, of course, the associated Palestinian civilians who happen to live in Gaza, which Hamas controls, which makes the situation very difficult. Then we have hybrid activity, especially we notice in this part of the world. More than 2 years, Belarusian government attempts to organize third-party nationals' illegal crossing of the European borders, external borders, so Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. We have recently the gas line breach and also a data cable between Finland and Estonia. In the 3 Baltic states, at different times, becoming in the past few weeks, are massive threats to schools. Hundreds and hundreds. In Latvia, more than 400 schools simultaneously got an email, saying there's a bomb threat, and the same kind of attacks have occurred in our Baltic neighbors. And all of these things end up to be, as the president's, how did you say it? It's a mess. But the question is, how do we deal with it? On top of when we see that of the, say, non-democratic countries, you see ever-increasing relations and sort of interaction between countries such as North Korea, Iran, Russia. Okay, maybe I'm not ready to put the word China as the next country, but the question does arise, sort of what is China's role in this? Which way will China decide? Will it come down on the rules-based? Or will China not be supporting this system? I think that's still hopefully an open question. But what to do about this? Well, the first thing that we have to do is strengthen our military capabilities, our combined capabilities through strengthening NATO. The good news is it's happening. So in my own country, if you look at just if you take away investments, it's 2.3% of GDP. This year, it could go up to 2.8. If you look at weapons purchases, we will be hitting 3% in about 4 years. So we're clearly on our way. Our Baltic neighbors are the same. Poland is the same. And more NATO members are finally investing this 2%. We also see the NATO EFP in Latvia, the framework nation, Canada, and others really stepping up with investment, with equipment, and with personnel. Then we have Finland already joined, Sweden en route to join, and very important that we keep Ukraine also as the goal that they must, when this war and the hostilities end, they must come into NATO in order for us to have a lasting peace. Strengthening of the eastern flank. Now we have air patrols in the Baltics. Now NATO is increasing sea patrols to guard the undersea assets that we all have. All of this combined is what we have to do. But the threat is that it's not only militarily that we have to work. We have to work with countries such as India, which is it's the world's largest democracy, to work with India to bring them, shall we say, ever closer into the democratic alliance, I suppose you could call that. And I think there's a big challenge on how we interact with China, which seems to have its own policy and its own ideas of world order, but is probably also in certain ways self-interested in preserving a rules-based system when we need to encourage that as long as it is possible. And I would like to say that times are challenging. They're not impossible, but it means all of us in responsible positions. It means basically everyone in this conference. We have a hell of an important and big job to do, to keep our head, to keep our cool, and to work together. That's the most important thing. When democracies work together, we will prevail. Thank you.
Dear President Rinkiewicz, dear Minister Kainz, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm extremely happy, President, to be here in Latvia again for this conference. Very happy to be here because, first and foremost, I would like to thank you, to thank Latvia, actual government, previous government, for everything you have done, supporting Ukraine. You have done tremendous, huge effort. And by doing so, of course, like any 27 member states, we supported what was needed to help Ukrainian authorities to fight back this unjustified aggression. But also, what you have done here is also beyond Latvia's own interest. It is also to support the global European security. And again, for all of this, you know probably better than anyone what means the threat that Russia represents. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted also to say, before maybe entering more into details, that all the more important things that we have to cope with in the world, as you have described, Mr. President, dear Minister, we have now seen that a lot of new security challenges have emerged at the EU level. And this is something really new for us, I should say, in Europe. Look at what happened and how we had to react over the past 2, 3, 4 years. Energy security, following the necessity to get rid of the Russian gas dependency. And we know that every time we have a dependency with Russia, he will use it potentially as a weapon. And we have been able to do this. It was not something for granted, but we did it. Critical infrastructure security, you just spoke a few minutes about it, such as undersea cables or energy pipes. That's also something extremely important that we have to take care of all together. Health security after the pandemic, where Europe emerged as the vaccine producer, especially in mRNA vaccines of the world. And we know that we had not exactly the same approach than our American friends. We didn't close our borders. We worked together. We vaccinated all our fellow citizens, and we offered also the capacity to 112 countries, partners, allies, and everyone who needed it. Economic security, where there is an imperative need to reduce our critical dependencies, and notably, by the way, on critical technologies, and also, which is extremely important, to enhance our supply chain. So new geopolitics of supply chain. And finally, societal security with the necessity, and you mentioned it, to stop hate speech, anti-Semitic and terrorist content, and all other illegal content on the platforms, which are playing, as we know, such a role in our lives and our democracies. On all these elements, I should say that, because we had to react, first we react all together, the 27, without any discrepancies. New platform regulation, and we see these days how important it is. We are the first continent on the planet to do this, of the free world. Economic security strategy, risk assessment on 10 critical technologies, and not to mention our collective work with member states to reduce our energy dependencies and increase the security of our critical infrastructure. So all these elements are what I will call the basis of, let's say, the emergence of Europe as a power. A Europe which is not anymore only a single market. And of course, I will be happy to discuss this later on together with you. But as an introduction of the Riga conference, focusing much more, of course, of defense per se, I would like to focus on the European defense cooperation. With a very single message. It is time that as Europe, we increase our defense readiness as a strong guarantee of our collective security. And let me be straightforward. This is not at all contradictory with NATO. On the contrary, a stronger Europe in defense is a stronger NATO. Because in Europe we are NATO. So the stronger we are, the stronger NATO will be. And we know how important NATO is for the collective security of all the allies. And we are determined to play our role here. But as the President of Czechia mentioned last week, or a few weeks ago, not last week, 2 weeks ago, I think, it is essential also to decrease our over-dependencies on the capacity of our allies, for example, the US, building, again, a very strong European pillar in NATO. And for this, of course, we need what? More investment together. Let me be straightforward. We are almost all of us, we are member of NATO. And as member of NATO, we have to spend 2% of our GDP in defense. It was not the case in the past. It was maybe a period of so-called dividend of peace, and unfortunately, I say that, we didn't do enough in Europe. We were not at 2%, believe me. It was more than 1% than 2%. And I made the calculation, if we had spent altogether what we had to spend, the 2%, we will have invested 1.3 trillion more in defense since the past 20 years. And of course, this is missing now. So we need to catch up. But the good news, if I may say so, at least for defense, is that everyone now committed to reach the 2%. By the way, I would like to congratulate Latvia government, Mr. President, already at 2.2, 2.3%, and as you say, Minister, going up to 3% by 2027. When we will be, all of us, the sooner will be the best. At 2%, it will mean an additional spending of 140 billion euro per year in defense. Of course, we have to be ready for that. We have to be ready for that because the key subject now is that our industry will be also ready for joint cooperation, interoperability, and everything that we need to do together. And this is my second point that I wanted to share with you. First, on defense industry. And we take, of course, as you know, defense is a prerogative of member states. This is how we run our democracy here in Europe. I say sometimes, which is true, I mean, Europe is a big democracy. We are a big democracy. We put our governance system based on our history. We have our parliament, we have our council. Our council, Mr. President, it's a little bit like the US Senate. This is the two co-legislators. We are a big democracy of 450 million inhabitants, 1.5 bigger than the United States. So that's a big democracy. But in our democracy, member states have the prerogative of their own defense capabilities and choices. Same thing, by the way, for health, same thing for energy. But we have demonstrated that for health and for energy, when we put our effort together, we can win. But by the way, same thing for defense. Same thing for defense, and we started with the European Defense Fund, which is a very important tool that we have put in place at the beginning of the mandate, and that we run with my services, in order to support upfront project and R&D, let's say, in a critical project in defense. We already invested 3 billion upfront, together, of course, with member states and defense industry, with more than 100 projects, very important in anything. You can speak tanks, frigates, cyber, hypersonic missiles, everything. We do it. By the way, we can do everything in Europe in technology, in defense technology. Yeah. The problem is that now we need to be ready, and I will come back in a few minutes on this. And 700 companies are working, including a lot in Latvia, on this R&D upfront project for defense. But of course, the subject now is to be ready. You know, very often I hear when I'm going into member states, Commissioner, look, we have so good product, we have the best product in defense, but look, these countries, they didn't buy my product. I say, oh, yes, but why? But I don't know why, because it's the best. But when will you be ready? But in 4 years. Okay. But there is a war on our continent. And readiness concept is something that the defense industry must adapt itself to, because this is the new reality we are coping with. And this is why, in order to, to help to change the mindset of our defense industry, we decided, because we are in an urgent need after the very strong support that we bring to Ukraine, to refill our stocks and also to continue to support Ukraine, especially in ammunition, but not only. And in order to do this, we committed a very large number of ammunitions. We committed also to increase our industrial base. We decided to help also defense industry to increase its capacity to fulfill our new requirements while producing much more than 1 million, for example, shells, 155 or missiles a year, And we have now this new ASAP program where we will be able to put money up front to support the industry. We launched the call for tender 2 days ago. We will have this ready. And I'm very convinced that we'll be able to increase drastically and very quickly our capacity to produce much more ammunition, what is needed again, to continue to support Ukraine as long as it takes, and also to support our own member states in this endeavor. Of course, on a much broader scale, what is extremely important is that we need now to be ready to increase drastically our capacity in any kind of defense industry. This is why we have decided to work on a new, let's say, defense industry strategy that was announced a few days ago. We will convene all member states, stakeholders within the next few months, working on this new sort of white paper, to see what we need to do to increase our capacity to produce more, and also to change a little bit the mindset of the defense industry, which was in the past more focused on the ability to answer without respect, sometime of time, sometime also of budget, and now to be ready to accept the challenge to deliver, even when you don't have a contract, just because we may have a need. And changing this mindset, we need, of course, to invest upfront, or let's say to share the risk with the defense industry upfront. And this is what we want to work on now with member states within the next 4 months, and to be ready to propose a new European Defense Investment Program. We call it EDIP, and the right financing to do this. So, ladies and gentlemen, if Europe is serious, is becoming a true geopolitical actor, it must progressively work towards more European defense cooperation. As I said, we are able to produce everything in Europe. Now we have to be able to deliver everything on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's the most enlightening and interesting and moving messages. But I'd like to talk right now about what's happening today, very immediately. Last night, President Biden gave one of his most important foreign policy speeches. In fact, it was the first such speech he had given from the Oval Office himself. He described America as a beacon to the world. So my question is a very simple one. Is America still that beacon? Foreign Minister, would you like to start?
Is this a yes-no answer, or? U.S. democracy is from 1776. That's 247 years. Continual democracy. It's not the oldest democracy. We had Rome, we had Athens. We don't know about the Sumerians. Maybe they did it too. But it's the longest continual democracy. And it's founded, I mean, you can turn it a number of ways, but it has 3 basic principles. Freedom, individual freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And insofar as these 3 principles have been upheld in the US for 247 years and have helped to inspire growth of democracy, certainly throughout Europe, and I would say broader in the world, that yes, the ideals of US democracy are still a very clear beacon to the world, but that beacon is starting to dim in some ways. I'm not saying the US is starting to dim, but the drive for those values, because they are being challenged. But certainly, I think democracy is alive and well, and I think many of us in this room follow US democracy, and it's certainly not uninteresting at this time. But without these basic values, you are back to the law of the jungle. Who is biggest, who is strongest, and individuals, their rights don't matter.
But that democracy has to work. In other words, it has to function. It has to find a way of For instance, the president announced $100 billion of aid to, to the Middle East, to Israel, particularly Ukraine, and in support of the democracy, shall we say, in Asia. Yet Congress is totally dysfunctional at this point. There seems to be no way of getting past all of that. How concerned are you that, in fact, this democracy, the democratic system, the principle may be very much intact, but the implementation may not be?
I would say if you look back over the past 247 years of U.S. History, they've had a few wrinkles here and there. It's not always been smooth sailing. So right now there are a few wrinkles. But if you look at Congress and you look at individual congressmen's views, whether Republicans or Democrats, there is an overwhelming majority in support of Ukraine, an overwhelming majority of support for Israel. And there's a small handful of congressmen who currently have a little bit of ability within one party to influence maybe far beyond their mathematical number. I would say I wouldn't write off U.S. Democracy quite yet. I think they'll figure it out.
Now, Mr. Breton, following up on that, of course, I wrote a column last week suggesting that the West, particularly the United States arms industries and so on, may be stretched very thin in terms of their ability to basically subsidize two different wars and prepare for a third at the same time. What do you see as that reality?
Well, first, I think that your question is very relevant because, of course, we have said that. The President said it, you said it, I said it. Things are changing very fast around ourselves. And we realized that, of course, we need to take care ourselves more and more of our own security. Of course, we have alliances. Of course, we are a very strong partner on NATO and will continue to be that important. But it's very true. Your remarks are very true. We are all observing. I mean, we don't forget what happened with Capitol Hill. We are observing, yes, I don't say dysfunction in the US democracy, but it's not working the way it used to be when I was living in the United States. I lived for many, many years. It's true. It is a fact. So, of course, for us, we hope, because it is so important, that the US democracy will continue to be what it is. But, of course, it's true also that when we see, and I agree with you, hopefully the support will continue for Ukraine, but still, the signals which are sent are not good. It means what? It means that, by the way, we all know that President Obama already said that Europe had to take care of their own defense. I remember many discussions we had with President Trump, which were very, very clear on what he will do and not do in supporting Europe. So that's the reality we have to cope with, and this is why we need, and by the way, it's a strong request also from our American friends to increase our own defense readiness. Now, you're right with what happened now, this terrible terrorist attack and the consequences, terrible consequences from Hamas in Israel. It's true that now we are not only speaking on the terrible situation that Putin has created in Ukraine, with the consequences for us, let's be honest. And it's true that now we have many fronts to deal with. By the way, behind all these fronts, Putin plays probably a role. We are not naive. But still, we have to cope with this. Again, that's a reason why we will need to increase rapidly and drastically our capacity to be a much stronger partner for our allies.
Which raises the question, you know, I was in Paris when President Trump paid his first visit to Mr. Macron, 7 years ago now. And the week before that visit, Mr. Macron announced his first suggestion that there should be a European army of its own, mainly because of the challenges to NATO that President Trump was raising. There are similar challenges today. Is it time to, again, raise that question of a real European army?
Stronger and closer European cooperation within the NATO framework is a good direction to go to. I think the discussion, we've gone through all of this, is it Europe or is it NATO? I think everyone is quite clear that when we speak about strengthening Europe, we're not speaking as opposed to NATO, but a stronger, more united Europe would be a stronger pillar and a boost to NATO. So insofar as these can be non-contradictory, I think this is a direction to work towards. We see it on a low level, say, cooperation between NATO countries in military purchases. So we do this quite well now with our northern neighbors. We're also working now with our southern neighbor. This is all we have to learn to. Militaries are very conservative, you know, and it's very nation-based. But when we pool these efforts, we can be stronger. And I think the discussion, how it started out as being a contradiction, I don't know anyone who speaks in terms of this contradiction. Also with President Macron himself, he has long ago stated quite clearly he does not intend this as opposed to, but as a strengthening of.
Maybe if I add something on this, to be maybe a little bit more precise. European Army, no. I mean, it's today a dream, because we have, again, as I said, member states, their own defense capacities, and I think it will continue this way. And we need to find a way to work more closely, including, of course, within our NATO alliance. But, there is a big but. We have now, for the first time ever, established our strategic compass. In other words, the 27 member states, we have now a global vision, that has been done a year ago, on what we should do collectively in defense. And I encourage you to read the strategic compass. It said many things. But he said three things which are very important that I would like to elaborate 1 minute, if you allow me. First, in terms of contested areas, we need to act together. What are contested areas? Of course, cyber, of course, space, of course, air, and of course, maritime. That's the contested areas. And in these contested areas, like cyber, space, not one single country can do it. And we start to increase our capacities here. This is what we have decided, to have a common infrastructure and then to operate it jointly, like we do already for defense, for example, with our constellations like Galileo for positioning, using also for military applications. We know we have the governance to do it. Let's do it. So we are in the process to do it now with cyber, with a global cyber shield. We do it now in space with our new constellation, IRIS², which will be able to be the backbone to have the control from space to space and operated at a European level. We need to do it, of course, also for maritime, including to protect what happened under the sea, and of course for a more global and coordinated air dome. So this is areas where we know we have the know-how, the willingness, and the budget now to build joint infrastructure, European infrastructure, and to operate it jointly.
We had a question from the audience, actually, which has just disappeared from the screen here, but I'll summarize it if I can. The question really is, are you both concerned that the attention of the world is being drawn away from Ukraine to the Middle East, to Israel and Hamas? There was a marvelous cartoon on the front page of Le Monde yesterday. You may have seen it, Monsieur Breton, that shows Zelensky at a podium saying, and a whole lot of the world press has suddenly been changed over towards looking at the Middle East, saying, "I'm not finished here yet." So are you concerned that the world has suddenly decided that they have been finished here yet, and that that may in fact impact the ability of the West to muster the resources needed to continue to confront Russia?
Yep. If we look at the political level, it's not influenced, neither European, as we heard yesterday, U.S. government commitment to continuing support of Ukraine. But the media does have a role in influencing public opinion, and if we lose public opinion support, that could be challenging. Today on my way over, I took a look through a number of international media outlets, BBC, CNN, Tagesschau, Le Monde, Reuters, and Wall Street Journal, and the only one that on the front page had anything to do with Ukraine was Le Monde. And it was the first article, and the article was about Putin is using the distraction of Israel and Hamas to his own ends. And all the other headlines were all about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Israel. Will Israel make the ground attack? Will it not? All sorts of analysis. So the attention is there, yes. The political support for Ukraine is completely unchanged. But I think it's important, and this is what I'm always reminding, is that as Hamas had this brutal attack and still attacks on the sovereign state of Israel, it does not mean that the Russian war in Ukraine is going down. It's any less. If anything, during that time, Russia did attempt a certain counter offensive, which Ukraine was able to stop. But the attacks are continuing, also attacks on civilian infrastructure. So if the media is not directly drawing attention in the past 2 weeks, it's chances like this and politicians such as myself which will continue to speak about the need. And it doesn't mean it's one or the other, but you can easily support both. But the important thing is to maintain also public opinion, to realize that the threat, it's not something just far away. This is a threat for all of Europe, and that is the threat of Russia.
Well, you mentioned Xi Jinping, and we have just a couple of minutes left. I'd like to get into China just for a moment. Both of you gentlemen are deeply concerned with China, a profound challenge in terms of economy and trade. Xi Jinping likes to say that he can be the mediator to the world, shall we say, and he's hoping that he can play that role. I'm somewhat skeptical about his ability to undertake that effort, but at any rate, do you think that the current way the EU is dealing with China is adequate to the challenge at this point? You first, and then Monsieur Breton, please.
Well, in the EU, we don't have a united China policy. This is something that recently, as a prime minister, now as a foreign minister, we're not all on the same page yet because our level of engagement with China is different. Some member states are very heavily invested and their export markets are very dependent upon Chinese purchases. Other member states less. But the good news is we are speaking about this and we're looking for a way to formulate. I think the closest thing to a formulation that we have is that at the same time China is a partner, adversary, and a potential threat, all at the same time in different ways. That's a clever way of saying I think we're not quite there, but we will be.
Would you agree with that, Monsieur?
Well,
very briefly.
Very briefly, but I want to say one thing on the previous question that you didn't ask my answer, and one thing for this one. For the previous one, you are absolutely right. By the way, I wanted to remind the audience that we in Europe now are spending more money than the US to support Ukraine, and we will continue to do this. And by the way, it's true also that it has been difficult for the Congress to support the last package. We know, you know why. If we see the thing, I'm very cautious with my wording, a bit more, being more optimistic for the next package. I understand it's $100 billion that the president announced. He said that he missed the first package for Ukraine. He will mix everything, including the support to Israel, in a more global package. So hopefully he will have the chance to do it finally. But my point now for China, this is what I just wanted to say. For China, of course, as you said, the minister said, we are both a systemic rival. It was what we have decided to be. It was not this commission, but the previous commission, the Juncker Commission. And we are also a commercial partner. That's what we are in Europe. And what we are doing now, step by step, is defining what it means to be a systemic rival. We are not naive. We are very careful in our dependencies. We have selected critical technologies where we don't want to go too far, by the way, also with our allies, the US. And for the rest, we are, of course, very cautious on the level playing field including in trade. As you know, we have launched an investigation today on the electric car industry. But of course, we are also commercial partners, and we are dealing with this dual aspect, and I think more and more clearly.
Okay, one final question. What if we have a second round of Donald Trump?
Well,
You're asking. Well, then certainly politics would not be boring for a number of years. But look, from Latvia's point of view, in spite of everything that Trump often said, and he says a lot of things, during his 4 years, U.S. military presence in the Baltics increased. U.S. support for our country during that time militarily from the U.S. increased. So, you know, we all have opinions, especially as politicians. I suppose we have opinions about politics, but the important thing is what is the actual actions. And you know, how U.S. policy will pan out is unclear, but I would say I'm a cautious optimist. I think that at the end of the day, the U.S. also will realize, regardless of what party you come from, that they have a self-interest in maintaining the world order that they have helped to create since the Second World War. And it's that self-interest that ultimately should push any politician to think hard and fast about what kind of changes you'd want to make.
Donald Trump?
You know, I remember the first meeting we had with Ursula von der Leyen with Donald Trump when he said that he will get rid of NATO, that he will not do anything to support Europe, and so on. So we are we lived with this, and you know what was the decision and the reaction? Let's increase our own capacity to monitor ourselves, our own destiny, and be a stronger and stronger ally for our friends. One example, we have been able to put in place the first global worldwide regulation on digital platforms. It has been quite a journey, believe me, but it's up and running now. If it could help others, here also, like for example, our US friends, will be happy to do it.
Well, I think our global conference, Riga Global Conference, is well launched, and I want to thank our two gentlemen here for performing that task so brilliantly, and thank all of you for being so patient and listening to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.